In the forgotten archives of the Wisconsin Diocese lies a collection of documents the Catholic Church has tried to keep hidden for more than 160 years. These papers describe the systematic disappearance of 23 nuns from St. Mary's Convent near Lake Michigan between 1854 and 1862. For decades, church officials dismissed these records as mere administrative errors or misinterpretations. But the testimony of 3 independent diocesan inspectors, along with a cache of private letters discovered inside a sealed wall during recent renovations, tells a story so disturbing that even hardened historians question whether such evil could have existed within hallowed walls. What follows is the first full account of what many consider the most chilling case of religious corruption in American history, a case the Catholic Church has spent a fortune trying to erase. Before we return to St. Mary's Convent, if you already find this story unsettling, subscribe to our channel for more historically grounded accounts of America's darkest religious secrets. Our community of mystery seekers spans all 50 states. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below. Now, let's step back into the Wisconsin countryside of 1854, where the story begins. The morning fog clung to Lake Michigan as Bishop William Corder's carriage passed through the gates of what would become St. Mary's Convent. The church had purchased a sprawling estate, once a lumber baron's mansion surrounded by 30 acres of dense woodland, with the goal of establishing the first major Catholic institution in the largely Protestant Wisconsin territory. This expansion was part of a broader effort to strengthen Catholic influence on America's rapidly growing frontier, where Protestant denominations already held strong footholds. The mansion itself was a striking limestone structure with 3 wings and a tall bell tower, standing in stark contrast to the simple wooden churches that dotted the surrounding landscape. Built in 1842, its Gothic arches and narrow windows seemed to watch over the countryside like silent sentinels. The east wing was designated for the nuns' quarters, the west wing for the orphanage and infirmary. Behind the main building stood a small chapel, its spire visible for miles across the flat Wisconsin plains. Local Protestant families viewed the arrival of the nuns with suspicion. Their black habits and Irish accents marked them as outsiders in a community dominated by German and Scandinavian settlers. For residents accustomed to the democratic, open structure of Lutheran and Methodist congregations, Catholic hierarchy and ritual felt foreign and threatening. On the day of the convent's consecration, a small but tense crowd gathered outside the gates. "Papists," muttered Elijah Hoffman, an elder of the local Lutheran church, as he watched the black-robed women process into chapel. "They'll bring their foreign ways here, corrupt our children with their idolatry." His companion, Wilhelm Schmidt, nodded grimly. "My grandfather fled Germany to escape Catholic persecution. Now, they follow us even here." This sentiment, though not shared by all, reflected the deep religious tensions that would set the stage for the tragedy to come. St. Mary's will serve as a beacon of God's mercy in this wilderness, Bishop Corder declared during the consecration ceremony. His Boston-accented voice echoed to the newly built chapel, where morning light filtered through stained glass, scattering colored patterns across the pews. Under the guidance of Mother Superior Catherine Murphy, he proclaimed the convent would provide shelter for orphans, comfort for widows, and healing for the sick. Mother Catherine, a tall, commanding figure in her black habit, carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to obedience. At 42, she possessed a sharp gaze and elegant, steady hands capable of comforting a frightened child or disciplining a disobedient novice. Her pale blue eyes were said to look straight through a person's soul. Sister Elizabeth Foster, 38, plump and warm-hearted, would oversee the orphanage. Her perpetual smile and soft voice made her seem perfectly suited for caring for abandoned children. She spoke slowly, as if weighing each word, a trait some found comforting, others unsettling. Sister Margaret Clark, 35, with her precise manner and deep knowledge of herbal medicine, would run the infirmary. Tall and spare, with watchful dark eyes, she measured every movement carefully, her hands skilled in both traditional and modern medicine. Behind them stood 20 younger nuns, ready to dedicate their lives to God in this remote and often hostile frontier. Most of the sisters were in their 20s, fresh from Ireland, completing the founding community of St. Mary's. They stood in perfect formation, crisp black habits, heads bowed as Bishop Corder blessed each one by name. Sister Agnes O'Connor, Sister Bernadette Walsh, Sister Teresa Donovan, Sister Mary Collins, young women who had left behind family and homeland to serve God in a distant, unfamiliar country. Their faces remained solemn through the ceremony, but when they thought no one was watching, the fear and uncertainty of youth sometimes broke through their expressions. "The Lord has called us to this wilderness," Mother Catherine told her sisters that first evening. Candlelight flickered along the refectory walls, stretching shadows across the stone floor. The air smelled of fresh bread and weak tea, and despite the fire roaring at the far end of the room, the Wisconsin chill seeped through the walls. "We will face hardships unknown to our sisters in the East," she continued. "We will meet suspicion, even hatred, from those who fear our faith, but through devotion and sacrifice we will endure." The young nuns, far from home and family, clung to her words like a lifeline. Later that night, Sister Agnes whispered to Sister Bernadette as they lay in their narrow cots, barely an arm's length apart in the dormitory-style quarters, "Do you think the locals will ever accept us?" Agnes' voice trembled, betraying the brave face she had worn all day. Bernadette reached for her hand in the darkness. "They feared our Lord at first too," she whispered. "We will show them through our works that we mean only good." Their hushed conversation ended abruptly at the sound of footsteps, Mother Catherine making her nightly rounds, ensuring order on this first night in their new home. Within weeks, the convent became a functioning religious community. The rhythm of prayer began with matins at 3 a.m., the chapel bells cutting to pre-dawn darkness and summoning the sisters from warm beds to kneel on cold stone floors. 7 times a day, the drone of Latin chants filled the chapel, a sound that soon became as much a part of the local landscape as the wind to the pines or the distant lowing of cattle. Between prayers, the nuns ran the orphanage, tended the sick, and cultivated large vegetable gardens. Their days were governed by a strict cycle: prayer, work, simple meals, brief recreation, more prayer, a rhythm designed to keep the mind fixed on God, not personal comfort. By the winter of 1854, the orphanage housed 12 children, most of them the offspring of Irish laborers killed in railway or lumber accidents. Sister Elizabeth oversaw their care with gentle patience, teaching them letters, numbers, and Catholic doctrine. On Sundays, local families sometimes visited after Mass, bringing small gifts for children and occasionally asking about adoption. Sister Margaret's infirmary also grew in reputation. Her herbal remedies, poultices for inflammation, teas for fever, chest compresses for illness, often worked where local doctors could not reach in time. Through blizzards and blocked roads, the sisters' self-sufficiency impressed even their Protestant neighbors. Suspicion gave way, little by little, to respect. They keep to themselves. Elijah Hoffman admitted to his congregation after Sister Margaret cured his grandson's stubborn cough. But they do good work. Perhaps there is room for more than one path to heaven in this country. At 23, Sister Agnes was one of the youngest nuns at St. Mary's. Her letters to Ireland, now preserved in the Dublin Diocesan Archive, offer a rare window into the convent's early days. "The work is harder than I ever imagined," she wrote in December 1854, "the pages stained with faint tear marks. My hands are raw from washing linens in icy water, and the chapel stones freeze our knees during morning prayer. But Mother Catherine tells us that our sacrifices please God. Sister Elizabeth has been especially kind, bringing me extra blankets and helping me with the orphans. Sister Margaret's remedies saved many children during a fever last month. I believe we are doing God's work, though I still cry myself to sleep some nights, missing the green hills of home." What these letters do not reveal, and what Agnes herself may not have fully understood, were the subtle changes taking place inside St. Mary's. Mother Catherine's leadership, once merely strict, was hardening into something harsher. Minor infractions, once met with gentle correction, now brought severe penances. One cold January evening in 1855, Sister Josephine Brady's hands shook as she tried to mend a tear in her habit. Earlier, she had broken silence during afternoon prayer with a single cough, an accident. For this, Mother Catherine had sentenced her to kneel on dried peas and recite the entire rosary. By the end, her knees were bleeding. As Sister Mary Collins helped her thread the needle, their eyes met in quiet sympathy. Do not draw attention to her weakness. Mother Catherine's voice cut sharply through the silence. Mother Catherine's voice cut sharply through the workroom, startling both women. She had entered without a sound, a habit that unsettled the younger nuns more with each passing day. Sister Josephine must learn that discipline is the cornerstone of devotion, Mother Catherine said coldly. Each of you would do well to remember that. By the spring of 1855, St. Mary's had become renowned for its charity. When a measles epidemic swept through the nearby lumber camps, Sister Margaret treated dozens of sick workers, Catholic and Protestant alike. Grateful families sent donations, and even local ministers, once suspicious, publicly praised the good work of the convent. But life behind the limestone walls was changing in ways no outsider could see. Meals grew eerily silent, the nuns staring into their bowls of thin soup, afraid to speak. Recreation hour, once filled with hushed conversation and occasional laughter, was now subdued, a quiet so heavy it seemed to press on the walls. Women who had crossed the ocean together now moved like shadows, careful not to draw attention to themselves. The first strange occurrence came in April 1855. Sister Agnes did not appear for morning prayers. One space stood empty in the chapel where 20 nuns have stood in perfect formation. Concerned glances passed quickly between the sisters until Mother Catherine entered, her pale face unreadable in the candlelight. Sister Agnes has been called to assist at our mission in Minnesota, she announced at breakfast, her tone allowing no questions. Her departure was sudden, as such callings often are. We shall all pray for her success in this new endeavor. Sister Bernadette's spoon clattered against her bowl. But Mother, she said nothing to me. Her voice faltered as Mother Catherine's cold blue eyes fixed on her. Are you suggesting, Sister Bernadette, that a bride of Christ must seek permission from her peers before answering God's call? The question froze the room. No, Mother, forgive me. Bernadette lowered her eyes to her cooling porridge. No one had seen Agnes pack or leave. She had mentioned no transfer in her letters home. But in the rigid hierarchy of convent life, no one dared ask further. That evening, some sisters noticed that Agnes' few possessions, her prayer book, the wooden rosary her mother had given her, her extra woolen stockings, were gone, and yet her winter cloak still hung on its peg. Would she have left without it? Mary Collins whispered to Sister Teresa during their brief time in the garden. Perhaps she was given a new one for the journey, Teresa replied, but her eyes darted nervously toward the convent windows. We should not speculate. 3 months later, Sister Bernadette vanished the same way. The bishop has requested Sister Bernadette's assistance with a delicate matter in Chicago, Mother Catherine said the next morning. She left before dawn to catch the train. Again, there had been no farewells, no sign of packing, just an empty bed and a calm explanation. Sister Elizabeth added during work period that day, the bishop felt Sister Bernadette's skill with the children would benefit the new foundling home. We should be proud she was chosen. Her words were smooth, but Sister Mary noticed her usually warm eyes were strangely cold as she spoke. By the winter of 1855, 3 more sisters had transferred to distant missions. Always the same pattern. A young nun, often one admired for her beauty or gentle spirit, failed to appear at prayers. A morning announcement followed, explaining her reassignment, always to a place far away, always without warning. Letters sent by families to these distant missions were returned months later with short, formal replies that contained little detail about the nun's new life. Years later, handwriting experts would conclude that every letter had been written by the same hand, not the missing nuns. Sister Teresa Donovan, tall and strong from her farm upbringing, was one of the few who dared to voice suspicion. She had already earned Mother Catherine's disapproval for questioning the increasingly harsh penances imposed on the younger sisters. It seemed strange that Rome would request so many transfers without proper documentation. Teresa whispered to Mary Collins one hot afternoon in the summer of 1856 as they harvested carrots from the garden. The garden had grown that year, with a new section of medicinal herbs that Sister Margaret tended behind a high wooden fence. Only she and Mother Catherine were ever allowed inside. "And have you noticed," Teresa continued, her Irish brogue thickening, "it is always the youngest and the prettiest who are called away? First Agnes with her golden hair, then Bernadette with her sweet singing voice, then Catherine with her perfect complexion, and Josephine with—" She stopped abruptly. A shadow had fallen over the garden. Sister Margaret stood at the window, her thin face unreadable as she watched them. Mary pressed a finger to her lips. "Do not speak of this again," she whispered. "We must trust Mother Catherine." The following week, Sister Teresa was gone. She has been called to a contemplative retreat in Montreal. Mother Catherine said calmly at morning prayers. Sister Mary, now deeply frightened, kept her head down and dared not speak of it again. That evening, as she made her bed, she discovered a small scrap of paper hidden beneath her pillow, a torn page from Sister Teresa's prayer book. In the margin, hastily scrawled, were the words, "Something is wrong. If I disappear, tell Father Ryan." The sight of her friend's familiar handwriting, the ink still fresh, sent a chill through Sister Mary's body, one that had nothing to do with the autumn wind slipping to the stone walls. By 1857, the pattern could no longer be ignored. Of the original 20 junior nuns, only 12 remained. The official explanations continued: special missions, disease outbreaks, nursing assignments. To the outside world, St. Mary's appeared to function as usual. Local families still brought their sick to Sister Margaret's infirmary. Orphans were still cared for, and Sunday visitors saw nothing amiss in the solemn processions of black-clad figures moving from chapel to garden to refectory. But inside those limestone walls, fear had become a living presence. The remaining nuns spoke only in whispers, avoided being alone, and counted the days until the next disappearance. Mother Catherine's rule grew harsher. Minor infractions brought severe penances, days of fasting, nights of prayer on the freezing chapel floor, public confessions of deeply personal sins. When Sister Claire O'Donnell was discovered with a piece of chocolate sent by her family, she was forced to kneel before the entire convent and confess to gluttony and deception. Her punishment: 3 days of fasting, water, and a single piece of bread each night. On the second night, when Sister Claire collapsed during prayers, it was Sister Margaret who revived her with smelling salts, her thin lips curling into what some later swore was a faint smile. Then came the night that would haunt Sister Mary forever. "In town," she whispered, pressing a small silver cross into the boy's hand. It had been her confirmation gift, the only thing of real value she owned. "Tell no one else. Lives depend on it." Jimmy nodded solemnly, his freckled face unusually serious. "Yes, sister, I promise." The note, preserved in the diocesan archives to this day, was short and chilling. "Something evil happens at St. Mary's. Nuns are disappearing, not sent away as claimed. I fear for my life. Please send help. Sister Mary Collins." Father Thomas Ryan, the young Irish priest who received the message, had long harbored quiet suspicions about Mother Catherine. On his monthly visits to say Mass at the convent, he had noticed the dwindling number of nuns and the evasive answers whenever he asked questions. But as a mere parish priest, his authority was limited. He paced the floor of his small study, the wooden boards creaking beneath his boots, as he read and reread Sister Mary's plea. The silver cross lay cold and heavy in his palm, a token no nun would part with unless the situation was truly desperate. Something had to be done. But what could a single priest do against a mother superior as respected and well-connected as Catherine Murphy? Instead of confronting her directly, Father Ryan made a difficult decision. He would take the matter to his superior. He rode to Milwaukee, enduring a grueling day-long journey through alternating ice and mud, arriving with his cassock splattered but his resolve unshaken. Bishop John Henney welcomed him into a richly appointed study, a stark contrast to Ryan's humble parish house. At first, the conversation centered around construction of Milwaukee's grand new St. John's Cathedral, the bishop proudly displaying architectural sketches. It will be the finest cathedral west of New York, he declared, his German accent still heavy despite decades in America. A true monument to our faith in this Protestant land. Father Ryan nodded politely, waiting for the right moment. When the bishop finally inquired about parish matters, Ryan carefully described his concerns. The dwindling ranks of St. Mary's, the vague explanations, and finally Sister Mary's note. The bishop's expression shifted from warm hospitality to cool reserve. "These are serious accusations, Father," he said, setting aside the silver cross without so much as a closer glance. "Mother Catherine has explained each transfer to my satisfaction. But, Your Excellency," Ryan pressed, 8 nuns have vanished in less than 3 years, without proper documentation. Families write letters and receive nothing but formal replies with no details. The frontier missions require women of education and discipline," the bishop replied, rising to his feet, the universal signal that the meeting was over. "I will not have you spreading rumors that could harm the church's standing in this Protestant region. Mother Catherine has been most generous to the cathedral fund. Her devotion is beyond reproach." As he ushered Ryan toward the door, the bishop added, his tone edged with warning, "See to your parish, Father. Leave the convents to those appointed by God to oversee them." Ryan left discouraged, but not defeated. If the church would not intervene, he would have to find another way. That chance came sooner than he expected. In March 1858, Bishop Henney assigned Father Ryan to collect financial reports from every parish and religious house in the diocese. This gave him legitimate authority to examine St. Mary's books, and perhaps uncover evidence of the truth. The early spring wind cut through his heavy coat as his horse-drawn buggy approached the convent. Something about St. Mary's felt different. The gardens were untended, the windows unervingly dark, and the bell that once rang faithfully for each divine office now sounded rarely and faintly. Sister Elizabeth greeted him at the door, but her usual warmth was gone. Her eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep, and her immaculate habit showed tiny signs of neglect. A missing pin, a faint stain on her white collar. "Father Ryan, we weren't expecting you today," she said, her surprise thinly veiled. "Mother Catherine is indisposed," she added quickly, leading him to a cold, bare parlor instead of the comfortable study where he usually met with the Mother Superior. "She asks that you leave the diocesan forms. She will complete them by week's end." "I'm afraid the bishop was quite clear," Ryan said, removing his coat and setting down his briefcase with deliberate calm. "I am to review the records personally this year. Financial irregularities have been discovered in other institutions." Sister Elizabeth's faint smile vanished entirely. "That won't be possible today. Sister Margaret, our bookkeeper, is tending to a dying child in the infirmary." "Then I shall wait," Father Ryan replied, settling more firmly into his chair. "Perhaps I might tour the convent while I wait. It has been some time since I last saw the orphanage improvements I've heard so much about." The flicker of emotion that crossed Sister Elizabeth's face, was it fear? Fear? Or anger? Whatever flashed across Sister Elizabeth's face vanished in an instant. "As you wish, Father," she said evenly, "though I must ask you to avoid the north wing. Several sisters are ill with influenza, and we would not want you exposed." The north wing, the one place Father Ryan had never been permitted to enter, supposedly because it contained the nuns' private quarters. His suspicion deepened. The tour revealed a convent far emptier than the reports claimed. Where were the 20 orphans Mother Catherine mentioned in her letters to the diocese? Father Ryan counted only 7 children, pale, thin, and skittish. When he tried to speak to one small girl sweeping the dormitory floor, Sister Elizabeth immediately intervened, sending the child away on an errand. The infirmary, allegedly caring for dozens of influenza victims, contained only 3 elderly patients, none of them showing any sign of illness. Sister Margaret, who was supposedly attending a dying child, was nowhere to be seen. Most disturbing of all was the reduced number of nuns. Just 3 months earlier, Ryan had offered Mass here for at least 15 sisters. Today, he counted only 8, including Elizabeth. When he asked casually about Sister Rebecca, Sister Josephine, Sister Claire, the answers were all the same: transfers, special missions, retreats. Finally, as they passed a laundry room, steam curling from the great wash tubs, Ryan asked, "And Sister Mary Collins?" Sister Elizabeth's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "She has been assigned to our mission in St. Louis," she replied after a beat. "She left last week. Her work with orphans made her ideal for the post." Ryan nodded, hiding the chill that ran through him. The writer of the desperate note was now among the missing. Before leaving, he requested to see the chapel. Once immaculate, it now bore subtle signs of neglect. Dust on the altar rail, unpolished candlesticks, wilted flowers. The sacred space felt hollow, as though the very stones recoiled from what was happening here. When Sister Elizabeth was momentarily distracted by a novice's message, Ryan slipped through a side door into the residential wing. The corridor was eerily silent. Many cells stood empty, personal effects gone. As he turned to leave, a sound stopped him cold, faint, almost inaudible, something between a moan and a sob, coming from a heavy wooden door at the corridor's far end. Unlike the others, this door was reinforced and secured with a thick iron lock. Ryan approached cautiously, listening. "Is someone there?" he whispered through the keyhole. "Do you need help?" A pause, then a rasping, female voice. Father, is it you? Please help us. Please." Before he could respond, a voice rang out behind him, sharp as a whip. "Father Ryan, this area is strictly cloistered. Your presence here is most inappropriate." He spun to see Mother Catherine, flanked by Sister Margaret, and a man he did not know. The stranger was no priest or physician, but a broad-shouldered laborer with arms like tree trunks and a face carved into a permanent scowl. "Forgive me, Mother," Ryan said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "I must have lost my way after leaving the chapel." Mother Catherine's pale eyes bored into him. Her habit hung loosely on her frame. She had lost weight, but her presence was more intimidating than ever. "This wing houses sisters under special spiritual direction," she said coolly. "Their seclusion is essential to their vocation." "I heard someone calling for help," Ryan countered, his courage rising. "You heard Sister enduring her mortifications," Sister Margaret said smoothly. "Some of our most devout sisters practice penances that sound distressing to those unfamiliar with such exercises." Mother Catherine nodded to the large man. "Mr. Callahan will show you out. We will send the financial reports to Milwaukee by week's end." Callahan stepped forward, gripping Ryan's arm with unnecessary force. "This way, Father," he said, his voice polite but edged with menace. As Callahan escorted him from the building, Ryan caught one last glimpse of the locked door. The woman had said, "Us." How many were behind that door? Once his buggy cleared the convent gates, Father Ryan struck the reins, urging his horse into a gallop. His mind raced faster than the pounding hooves. The voice, the lock, the missing sisters, the frightened children, Callahan's threatening presence. It was undeniable now. Something sinister was happening at St. Mary's. This was no longer a matter for a parish priest. It demanded higher intervention. Bypassing Bishop Henney, whose inaction now seemed deliberate, Ryan sent an urgent telegram to Archbishop John Hughes in New York. Grave concerns regarding St. Mary's Convent, Wisconsin. Multiple nuns missing. Evidence of imprisonment. Suspect danger to remaining sisters. Local bishop unresponsive. requests immediate investigation. Father Thomas Ryan, St. Joseph's Parish. As our story unfolds, you're not alone if you feel a chill along your spine. Many in our community of mystery seekers report the same physical reactions to these grim accounts of history. Take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates true historical mysteries. Your engagement helps us continue uncovering America's darkest secrets. Now, as we return to 1858, a storm was gathering over St. Mary's Convent that would expose horrors beyond imagination. Archbishop Hughes, known for his uncompromising discipline, wasted no time. Rather than alerting Bishop Henny, he dispatched his trusted secretary, Monsignor Patrick Kelly, to Wisconsin for a surprise inspection. On April 17, 1858, Kelly arrived at the convent gates, accompanied by Father Ryan and two senior priests from nearby parishes. It was a bright spring morning, the kind that usually filled local farmers with hope for the planting season. Yet, as the clerics approached St. Mary's, a sense of foreboding seemed to cling to the limestone walls. Ravens circled above the bell tower, their harsh cries shattering the stillness. The reception told its own story. Mother Catherine, normally calm and commanding, appeared shaken by their arrival. Her pale face flushed with something between anger and fear as her eyes fell on Monsignor Kelly's robes and the sealed documents he carried. Inside the convent, chaos reigned. Nuns rushed through the corridors, arms full of papers. Through an open window, Father Ryan glimpsed two young sisters throwing bundles into the kitchen stove, where flames devoured the documents. The acrid smell of burning paper drifted through the courtyard. "This is highly irregular, Monsignor," Mother Catherine protested, her usual melodic voice edged with brittle sharpness. "We have protocols for visitations. Bishop Henny always provides notice weeks in advance, which is precisely why Archbishop Hughes instructed me to give no such notice," Monsignor Kelly replied coolly. Silver-haired and weathered, his presence radiated authority that even Catherine seemed unable to counter. He produced a letter, sealed with the Archbishop's crest. "I am authorized to conduct a complete inspection, records, grounds, and residence. No exceptions." For a moment, her pale eyes flickered toward Sister Margaret, who lingered in the shadows. Some silent exchange seemed to pass between them before Catherine forced a smile. "Of course, Monsignor. St. Mary's has nothing to hide, but I must insist you respect the enclosure of our cloistered sisters. Some are engaged in sacred exercises that must not be disturbed. My authority extends to every part of this convent," Monsignor Kelly answered firmly, holding the letter high. What followed would later fill 40 pages of his official report. An inspection that revealed horrors the church could scarcely imagine. When Kelly and Father Ryan advanced toward the north wing, they found Sister Elizabeth barring the corridor. Her usually kind face was grim, her voice unsteady. "Mother Catherine has forbidden entry. The sisters here are in retreat." "Sister," Kelly said gently but with steel in his tone, "I speak with the authority of Archbishop Hughes. Open this door, or you will be defying your vow of obedience." Elizabeth faltered, her composure cracking. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He will not be pleased." "He?" Father Ryan pressed. "Do you mean Bishop Henny?" She only shook her head, eyes darting to the windows as though expecting someone or something. Finally, trembling, she stepped aside. The heavy door was forced open. What lay beyond froze even seasoned priests in place. The storage room, no larger than 15 feet across, reeked of human misery. 5 nuns were crammed inside, pale and malnourished, their habits torn, their bodies showing marks of abuse. The single window had been boarded shut, leaving the space in near darkness. A foul stench of unwashed bodies and waste filled the air. Among them was Sister Rebecca, once vibrant, now skeletal. She struggled to her feet, her hollow eyes shining with desperate recognition. "Father Ryan," she rasped, her voice broken. "You came back." They rushed to bring her a chair. She clutched his hand, whispering, "They're preparing us For the doctor, for the house in Chicago. Monsignor Kelly leaned close, his voice gentle despite the horror etched on his face. What doctor? What house in Chicago? Dr. Matthews? Sister Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. He comes to examine us, to see which ones are suitable. She trembled, closing her eyes. The men pay more for nuns, for brides of Christ. That's what Mother Catherine tells them. While Father Ryan and Monsignor Kelly worked quickly to get the imprisoned nuns food, water, and medical attention, the other priests began combing through the convent. What they uncovered was no less horrifying. Behind a hidden door in the infirmary lay Sister Margaret's private quarters. Shelves lined with suspicious medicines, laudanum, chloroform, and other substances meant to render victims unconscious, gleamed in the lamplight. A leather-bound journal was discovered, its pages filled with cold, clinical notes, treatments administered to specific nuns, their responses, and whether they were considered suitable for transport. Elsewhere, priests examining the convent's ledgers found shocking financial discrepancies. Though St. Mary's reported only modest income from donations and handiwork, the record showed regular, substantial deposits, far more than any frontier convent could legitimately receive. Worst of all were coded entries referencing deliveries and commissions, each aligning with the disappearance of a nun. Transferred Sister Agnes O'Connor, May 1855. Commission, $400. Package delivered to Chicago establishment. Condition excellent. Another entry turned their blood cold. Sister Teresa Donovan, unsuitable for transfer due to resistance. Terminated November 1856. No commission. The truth began to emerge in fragments through documents, testimonies, and the hesitant words of the rescued nuns. Sister Claire O'Donnell, once she had been given a blanket and a safe space to speak, delivered the most damning account. I overheard them one night, she said, voice shaking. Mother Catherine called Sister Margaret by her real name. She said they had come too far to risk exposure now, that they had changed identities before and could do it again. Testimony from a former infirmary assistant confirmed what had happened to the real Mother Catherine Murphy. She had been poisoned shortly after arriving in Wisconsin. Her evening tea had been tampered with. She bled and vomited through the night, isolated under Sister Margaret's care, forbidden visitors until her death. The three impostors, Catherine, Margaret, and Elizabeth, had then seized full control of St. Mary's, slowly transforming it from a place of prayer into a hub of a trafficking network. Through patient questioning, the priests uncovered the full horror. Young, attractive nuns were singled out, accused of fabricated sins, and subjected to harsher and harsher penances. Once broken, they were drugged with laudanum, then violated by paying benefactors, wealthy men from Chicago and Milwaukee, even St. Louis, who paid premium prices for the chance to defile women of God. These visits took place after Compline, when silence was enforced. They smelled of cologne and whiskey, Sister Rebecca said flatly, her voice stripped of emotion. Mother Catherine would lead them to us. Some men paid extra to have us wear our habits during. She could not finish. Those who became pregnant were kept hidden until delivery. The babies were taken, and the women were then sold to brothels in Chicago or St. Louis, their innocence and forced pregnancies marketed as special attractions. The convent's orphanage was revealed to be a cover for additional exploitation. Older girls nearing puberty would suddenly be adopted by generous benefactors. In reality, sold into the same network. Boys were sent as unpaid farmhands, with Catherine collecting placement fees. And those who resisted? Sister Rebecca spoke with hollow calm. Sister Teresa Donovan was never sent to Montreal. She was held for weeks, assaulted over and over. When she still refused to submit, Callahan strangled her. Her body, and at least 3 others, lie buried in the vegetable garden. Mother Catherine made us watch. She said it was a lesson in obedience. Sister Teresa prayed the rosary until the ropes silenced her. As evening fell on April 17, 1858, Monsignor Kelly gave his order. St. Mary's Convent was to be closed at once. The surviving nuns were taken into protective custody. Local authorities were summoned and guards stationed to ensure no one escaped and no evidence was destroyed. Mother Catherine, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Margaret were placed under ecclesiastical arrest, confined to their own cells until civil authorities could arrive. "I was following orders," Sister Elizabeth whimpered as she was led to her cell. Mother Catherine said it was God's will, that the money was needed for the church's greater glory. Mother Catherine offered no defense. She remained stone-faced, her pale eyes unreadable as the door to her confinement closed. Only Sister Margaret reacted, a strange half-smile tugging at her lips. "You understand nothing of what you've uncovered," she told Monsignor Kelly as she was escorted away. "We serve a higher purpose than you can imagine." But the church's attempt to handle the scandal quietly soon collapsed. That night, Mr. Callahan, the burly enforcer, returned. Finding the convent under guard, he fled into the darkness, heading for Chicago to warn his associates. By the time the county sheriff arrived the next morning with formal arrest warrants, Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret had vanished. The doors to their cells were still locked from the outside, the windows barred. There were no signs of tampering. "It's as if they disappeared into thin air," the guard reported. But the convent's origins as a lumber baron's mansion suggested a more practical explanation. Hidden passages, escape routes built decades earlier for illicit meetings and quick getaways. The civil investigation that followed was as shocking as the initial discovery. Authorities seized Mother Catherine's hidden safe and uncovered meticulous financial records. Over $100,000 in transactions, roughly $3 million today. Over 8 years. Coded ledgers identified 23 nuns and 17 orphan girls who had been trafficked to brothels across the Midwest. Letters between the convent and their criminal associates in Chicago, St. Louis, and even New Orleans spelled out the atrocities in chilling detail. A genuine sister charity, untouched before our establishment. Minimum $300. Special requests habit. Religious items add $50 per session. Pregnant sisters command $500 for exclusive patrons. Most damning of all was a small leather notebook, discovered sewn into Sister Elizabeth's mattress. Its pages cataloged every transfer, dates, names, and chilling details. Some were disturbingly clinical. Sister Agnes delivered the Chicago operation, September 1855, valued at $400. Others revealed grotesque satisfaction. Sister Teresa fought magnificently. Callahan enjoyed subduing her. Buried East Corner Bean Field, November 1856. Guided by these notes, investigators dug up several areas of the convent garden. Beneath the bean plants lay shallow graves containing the remains of 4 nuns. Primitive forensic examinations confirmed Sister Rebecca's testimony. Each had been strangled. One victim was identified as Sister Mary Collins, thanks to a small St. Bridget medallion found with her remains. The disturbed soil suggested she had been killed just before, or perhaps during Father Ryan's fateful visit, likely after delivering the note that exposed the entire operation. In the aftermath, Sister Elizabeth Foster, born Margaret Wilson, was the only one of 3 ringleaders to face any form of justice. Found mentally unfit for trial, she was committed to the Wisconsin State Asylum, where she died in 1863. Her records describe her as mute by day, but screaming through the night about the master coming to punish her betrayal. Mother Catherine, real name still unknown, and Sister Margaret Clark, later identified as Catherine Donovan, no relation to murdered Sister Teresa, were never found. There were rumors, sightings in New Orleans, whispers of a ladies finishing school in Havana, reports of similar crimes against immigrant women. But by the time authorities arrived, the women had once again vanished. A nationwide alert was issued. Their descriptions circulated. Mother Catherine, about 45, 5 feet 8 inches, blue eyes, graying brown hair, slight Boston accent, carried herself with commanding authority. Sister Margaret, about 40, 5 feet 10 inches, very thin, black hair streaked with gray, spoke with precise, clinical diction, extensive medical knowledge. Despite the detailed descriptions and the church offering a generous reward, the two women were never apprehended. They disappeared into America's vast frontier, ghosts who had once worn the habit of nuns. James Callahan, identified at last as a Chicago enforcer, was captured 6 months later during a brothel raid. He was sentenced to hang for the murder of a police officer who tried to arrest him. Before his execution, Callahan confirmed many of the investigators' suspicions about the St. Mary's operation, but he claimed not to know the current whereabouts of Mother Catherine or Sister Margaret. They planned for this, he told the prison chaplain the night before his death. Mother Catherine always said we had escape routes ready, new identities waiting. They'd done it before, changed their skins like snakes when they had to. When pressed about the mysterious master mentioned in Sister Elizabeth's writings, Callahan grew visibly shaken. Don't ask about him, he warned. He's not someone you want to know, not someone you want knowing you. Whether this master was merely a delusion, a code name for a powerful patron, or something far more sinister, remains one of the enduring mysteries of the St. Mary's case. The church, desperate to contain the scandal, moved with calculated precision. Bishop Henney was quietly removed from his post and sent to a monastery in Europe, where he lived out his days in what official documents called prayerful reflection. But his private letters tell a different story. The blood of those poor women cries out to heaven, he wrote to another bishop in 1860. I cannot sleep for hearing their voices. Mother Catherine assured me the funds were for missionary work. I never questioned. God forgive me. I never questioned. The convent itself was demolished, the land sold, and the proceeds used to fund a legitimate orphanage in Milwaukee. No mention of the bodies found on the property, or the crimes that had taken place there, ever appeared in official church records. A secret ceremony deconsecrated the site. Only Monsignor Kelly and Archbishop Hughes were present. No public announcement was made. The surviving nuns were scattered to convents across the country. Each was required to sign a confidentiality oath under threat of excommunication, ensuring the silence would hold for the rest of their lives. Most did remain silent, carrying their trauma to the grave. Sister Josephine Brady, however, gave birth to a daughter 2 months after the rescue. Despite her pleas, church officials removed the child and placed her with a Catholic family in Pennsylvania under strict orders that her origins remain secret. This final wound broke Sister Josephine. She died by suicide in 1861, leaving behind a short, devastating note. I cannot forget. I cannot forgive. Not them, not the church, not myself. May God have mercy on us all. Sister Rebecca Murphy took a different path. Defying the church's silence, she left religious life entirely. Under the name Rachel Martin, she published a searing anonymous expose in 1865 titled The Dark Convent. Though condemned as Protestant slander and quickly suppressed, surviving copies reveal that her testimony matched official records in harrowing detail. In its closing pages she wrote, "What happened at St. Mary's was not merely the work of 3 wicked women. It was made possible by a system that prizes silence over truth, reputation over justice. Until the church confronts this flaw, there will be other St. Mary's, other victims, other crimes buried beneath holy ground." Within a year, church officials had bought and destroyed nearly every copy of the book. Protestant publishers, fearing lawsuits, soon ceased printing it. Rachel Martin disappeared from public record after 1866. Some evidence suggests she moved west to California, where she founded a shelter for abused women, a quiet act of penance and defiance that history has almost entirely forgotten. Father Thomas Ryan, the priest whose persistence had uncovered the crimes, was first praised and then quietly exiled to a remote parish in northern Minnesota. His personal journal, discovered after his death in 1886, reveals that he was haunted for the rest of his life by what he had seen. "I cannot forget the faces of those women betrayed by those who claimed to speak for Christ," he wrote. "I hear their cries in my dreams. I see Sister Rebecca's hollow eyes. I wonder about those we could not save, whose suffering continues in those houses of sin." The final entry, dated January 1886, just days before his death, reads, 28 years since St. Mary's, and the church still keeps silent. The letters I send to Rome go unanswered. The new bishops act as though it never happened. But it did happen. They were real women with real souls, and they suffered real horrors. If the church will not speak for them, then I pray that someday someone will find this account and remember them. Remember Sister Agnes, Sister Bernarde, Sister Teresa, and all the others whose names must not be forgotten. The most haunting questions surrounding St. Mary's were never answered. Who was a mysterious master that Sister Elizabeth screamed about in her final nights? Was he simply a delusion born of guilt and terror, or a powerful figure who remained in the shadows, orchestrating events long after the convent had been destroyed? Even more chilling was a possibility raised in Monsignor Kelly's final letter to Archbishop Hughes. If this operation existed in Wisconsin, Chicago, and St. Louis, then it exists elsewhere. We have merely cut off one head of the serpent. The body still lives. Kelly's warning was prophetic. Over the following decade, scattered reports emerged of women disappearing from Catholic institutions across the Midwest, often under mysterious circumstances. Most cases were dismissed as runaways or administrative errors. But in each instance, quiet settlements were made, records were sealed, and witnesses were reassigned. A familiar pattern that suggested the machinery behind St. Mary's was still operating, just more carefully. For the survivors, the tragedy of St. Mary's never truly ended. Sister Claire O'Donnell's night terrors worsened until she was forced out of religious life entirely. After a brief confinement in an asylum, she vanished from the historical record. Some believe she returned to Ireland under an assumed name. Sister Maria Fitzpatrick withdrew completely from the world. Her letters, preserved in her order's archives, are filled with desperate prayers for forgiveness and repeated pleas that her superiors exhume the bodies of the murdered nuns and grant them proper burials. Her request was never fulfilled. Sister Anne Sullivan became the quiet heart of reform from within the church. Though she never broke her vow of obedience, she worked tirelessly to create safe spaces for women in religious life and to encourage bishops to implement accountability measures. What happened to us was not God's will but human evil cloaked in sacred vestments, she wrote. If we do nothing, then the cloaks will be stolen again and more innocents will pay the price. Her efforts planted early seeds for what would eventually become 20th century church reform movements. And yet, the most enduring legacy of St. Mary's was silence. The church never publicly acknowledged the crimes committed within its walls. The victims were never named in official records, and no memorial marks the ground where 4 of them were discovered. The estate was sold to a private owner in the 1870s, and today, nothing remains of the convent except faint foundation stones buried beneath weeds, and a reputation among locals that the land is cursed. Even now, more than 160 years later, strange reports persist from the area. Farmers claim to hear chanting near the site at night, though no church stands there. Visitors have reported the sound of a bell tolling faintly in the early morning fog, though no bell tower has existed on the property for over a century. Whether these are merely folk tales or something more is for the listener to decide. What is certain is that the story of St. Mary's Convent is not just a story of one crime, but the human capacity to hide evil beneath holy symbols, and the terrible cost of silence. The graves of the murdered nuns were left unmarked. Today, no memorial stands to tell passers-by what horrors unfolded on that quiet Wisconsin land. The official church investigation listed 23 nuns and 17 orphan girls as confirmed victims, trafficked or murdered. But Sister Elizabeth's notebook hinted at something far more disturbing. It contained repeated references to rural acquisitions, young women abducted from remote farms and isolated settlements. Their disappearances never reported because frontier life was transient, record scarce, and families often powerless. Local newspapers from the era contained scattered reports of young women vanishing. Domestic servants said to have returned east. Farm daughters married and gone west. Widows who sought new opportunities in the city. But how many of these cases were really connected to St. Mary's? The truth is unknowable. One chilling entry in Sister Elizabeth's notebook, dated October 1857, reads, "Rural acquisitions this year, 14. Superior quality, primarily Scandinavian. Special commission from New Orleans fulfilled. Equally unsettling were the fates of the disappeared nuns who were never found. Of the 23 who vanished from Street Marys between 1854 and 1858, only 9 were ever accounted for murdered and buried on site. 5 recovered in brothel raids. The other 14 were likely sold into more distant networks, perhaps New Orleans, San Francisco, or even overseas." A partial answer came in 1872, when a Catholic missionary in San Francisco reported meeting a woman in a waterfront brothel who claimed to have once been Sister Catherine Walsh of St. Mary's Convent. By the time church officials arrived, she was dead of typhoid fever and buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. Whether she truly was one of the missing sisters will never be known, but her story aligned perfectly with the facts of the case. The most enduring mystery remains the fate of Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark, the architects of the entire operation. Research suggests that Sister Margaret, real name Catherine Donovan, had briefly entered a convent in Ireland before being expelled for moral failings. She arrived in America in the 1840s, where she likely met Murphy. Together, they exploited the rapid expansion of Catholic institutions across frontier America as perfect cover for their scheme. Their disappearance triggered one of the largest manhunts of pre-Civil War era, those conducted discreetly to avoid public scandal. Reported sightings place them in New Orleans, Havana, and later Mexico City, always attached to charitable or religious ventures. The last credible report came from a former Chicago police detective hired by the New York Diocese, who tracked them to Veracruz, Mexico in 1863, running a finishing school for girls. His report, still preserved in diocesan archives, ends ominously. "I believe the women known as Murphy and Clark have established a new operation under protection of powerful Mexican patrons. 2 officials who agreed to help me inspect the school were found dead the morning of our planned visit. I was warned, in no uncertain terms, to abandon my search. These women are protected at the highest levels of society. The legacy of St. Mary's reached far beyond Wisconsin. Its exposure fueled anti-Catholic sentiment across America in the 1850s and 1860s. Protestant papers sensationalized the story as evidence of Catholic corruption, and in response, Catholic communities became even more insular and secretive, the very culture that had allowed the abuse to flourish in the first place. Worse, St. Mary's established a blueprint that would echo for generations. Initial investigations limited to low-level perpetrators. Higher authorities shielded from scrutiny. Survivors relocated or silenced, and a swift return to normalcy without systemic reform. Archbishop Hughes himself privately acknowledged these failures in a sealed letter to Rome, only revealed in 1975. "We have removed the immediate cause of scandal and provided for the victims. Yet I fear our system contains fundamental flaws that permit such horrors to fester. I urge a full review of how we appoint and monitor those in positions of authority." But his recommendations were quietly ignored. The Church's preference for internal handling and discretion persisted well into the modern era. Today, the land where St. Mary's once stood is a quiet suburban neighborhood. Children play where 4 nuns were buried. The buildings are gone. The archives are redacted. The names of the victims are seldom spoken. But for those who know the story, the ground still seems heavy with memory, and with the unanswered question that haunts every page of this case. How many more St. Mary's were there? The graves of the murdered nuns were left unmarked, their remains eventually built over without consecration or acknowledgement. Yet the story persists, scattered across fragile documents, personal journals, newspaper clippings, and oral histories passed down through generations of Wisconsin Catholic families. These fragments, when assembled, reveal not only the horror of St. Mary's, but the systemic failures that allowed it to occur, the dangers of unquestioned authority, the vulnerability of isolated communities, and the human capacity for both extraordinary evil and extraordinary courage. Father Thomas Ryan, whose determination brought the truth to light, wrote in his final journal entry a plea that echoes across the centuries. Remember them. Remember that they lived, that they suffered, and that their suffering mattered. In uncovering their story, however incompletely, we honor that request and perhaps learn something essential about institutional power, human vulnerability, and the constant vigilance required to protect the innocent from those who would exploit sacred trust for profane purposes. The Wisconsin Historical Society preserves a small collection of materials related to St. Mary's Convent, accessible only to credentialed researchers. Among these is a water-damaged letter, apparently written by Sister and Sullivan in 1880, addressed to the adult daughter of Sister Josephine Brady. The child conceived in captivity and adopted away at birth. The letter was never sent, as Sister and could not locate the young woman, but its closing line serves as a fitting epitaph for this dark chapter in American religious history. Should you ever learn of your origins, know this: your mother was not shamed, but brave. The evil at St. Mary's was not of God, nor genuine faith, but of human cruelty, disguised in sacred garments. The true convent was not the limestone building that housed such horrors, but a community of women who sustained each other, whispered prayers and held hands in darkness, remembered each other's names when all else was taken, and believed in salvation even when God seemed absent. That is a legacy worth preserving, not the story of suffering, but of endurance. This tragedy shows us that the darkest evils often hide behind the most sacred facades, and that institutional silence can prolong suffering long after the initial crimes. Do you believe everything about St. Mary's has been revealed, or are there still secrets buried in Wisconsin soil? Leave your thoughts below. If this story chilled you and you want more dark mysteries, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves the unknown. The St. Mary's case ultimately became a watershed moment in American religious history, deliberately obscured from public memory. Investigations revealed networks of corruption reaching far beyond Wisconsin, implicating church officials, businessmen, and politicians across the Midwest. Though the church attempted to frame the horrors as the actions of three imposters, internal documents tell a different story. Bishop Henney received at least 7 letters between 1855 and 1858, raising concerns about disappearances and financial irregularities at St. Mary's. Each complaint was followed by a substantial donation from Mother Catherine to the Cathedral Fund, after which the complaints were quietly filed away. One damning 1856 exchange described a blood-stained nun's habit found in the woods. The bishop's instructions: return the garment to Mother Catherine and reassure the finder that it was merely theatrical, with a $500 donation following 3 days later. Oral histories add further depth. In 1932, historian Margaret Holloway recorded her grandmother recounting nights when screams echoed from St. Mary's North Wing. Children ran past, terrified of the sad ladies in black, watching from the windows. In 1890, Mary Callahan, sister of the executed James Callahan, approached the Pinkerton Detective Agency, bringing documents her brother had hidden. Correspondence between Mother Catherine and clients, financial ledgers, and lists of clerical and political figures who protected or patronized the operation. "My brother was no innocent," Mary said, her face lined with decades of carrying the terrible knowledge. "He did terrible things, but he was only a servant in this devil's work. Before he died, he told me where to find these papers. Now the principal architects are gone, and the truth can finally be told. The Pinkerton agent, a devout Catholic, delivered the portfolio directly to Cardinal James Gibbons in Baltimore. The Cardinal acknowledged receipt, promising appropriate action. Yet no public investigation followed, and the documents vanished into church archives. Even today, the full story of St. Mary's Convent remains partly hidden, its truths fragmented across time, reminding us of the consequences of secrecy, the courage of those who resisted, and the enduring need to remember. Buried secrets, the unfinished investigation of St. Mary's Convent, whether to protect the reputations of prominent families whose ancestors were implicated, or to shield institutional credibility. Powerful interests continue to obscure this dark chapter of American religious history. The Wisconsin countryside has long since reclaimed the land where St. Mary's once stood. New communities, new churches, new generations have risen, unaware of the horrors that once occurred beneath their soil. But on certain autumn nights, when fog rolls in from Lake Michigan and the wind whispers through the trees, local residents sometimes report faint sounds. Some describe women's voices chanting evening prayers. Others hear muffled cries for help. Whether these are mere tricks of the wind or something more remains a question each listener must answer for themselves. In 2018, during construction of a new housing development near the former Convent grounds, workers uncovered a small metal box buried beneath the soil. Inside was a rosary, a folded habit veil, and a handwritten list of 23 names, with the simple inscription, "Remember us." County officials turned the items over to diocesan archives, where they reportedly remain today uncatalogued and inaccessible to researchers. The family of Jimmy Fletcher, the farm boy who delivered Sister Mary's desperate note to Father Ryan, preserved their own memorial to the St. Mary's victims. 4 or 5 generations, a small shelf in their farmhouse kitchen has held a silver cross, believed to be the very one Sister Mary gave Jimmy in gratitude for his courage. Beside it sits a handwritten list of the nuns' names, carefully updated whenever new information surfaced. Great-great-grandpa Jimmy said, "We should never forget those ladies," said current family patriarch Robert Fletcher to a local newspaper in 2020. Sometimes the truth gets buried, but that doesn't make it any less true. Those women lived. They suffered. They mattered. Between 1854 and 1862, in the supposedly sacred confines of a Wisconsin convent, human evil reached extraordinary depths. That such evil was possible, and that the systems meant to prevent it instead enabled it, stands as a sobering reminder of our capacity for both depravity and denial. Perhaps the true horror of St. Mary's lies not in what occurred within those limestone walls, but in how easily it was erased from history once the walls came down. Remember Sister Agnes, Sister Bernardet, Sister Teresa, and all the others. Remember that they lived, that they suffered, and that their suffering mattered. If you want, I can combine all the sections you give me into a single, complete master script from the beginning of St. Mary's story to this final chapter, fully structured for narration, with suspenseful pacing, historical context, and natural segment transitions. Do you want me to do that next?